Welcome to 719 FPV. I'm Nick Roberts, and today's an exciting day because we are finally entering the world of long-range FPV with the help of TBS Crossfire and the Skystars G4 almost ready to fly kit. This is specifically the Skystars G4 4-inch long-range FPV drone ARF kit with GPS plug-and-play 6S. I know it's a long one, but there it is if you're interested. So we're gonna go real in-depth, step-by-step, building this drone. So let's go ahead, head over to the bench and open this up, see what's inside, and see what we've got ourselves into. So right away, we've got stickers. We have two sets of bi-blade. They are Gemfan Hurricane 4024 1.5 millimeter. We have the FPV camera and hardware. We have battery straps and some antenna tube. Right here we have the VTX, and we've got our TPU pieces. So we've got some arm protectors, and looks like we have a GPS mount, antenna mounts, and some standoffs. Here we have the flight controller. It is an F4 DJI. This should be an analog setup, so we'll figure out what's going on here. I'm not quite sure why there's two boards, but we will figure that out together. Here we have the ESC. It is a 35 amp BLHeliS 20x20. Should be pretty good. Here we have the right hand circular polarized VTX antenna. Battery pad, a little bit squishy, pretty small. We have the power cable with a capacitor. There's also a small linear antenna here, which might be for also VTX. We've got some other cables here, which probably go for the ESC and the flight controller. Right here is our GPS. It is a BN180 BI Titan. Then we have 4 motors. They are let's see. So they are a 1404 3800 kV. Nice blue and gold finish. We have some motor hardware. Then we have a baggie with some standoffs and looks like hardware for the frame. And then lastly in the box we have the frame. So we've got top and bottom plate, mid plate with 4 arms, and no instructions. So that's everything in the box, and we are gonna figure out how to put this together. So I'm gonna get organized, and we are gonna get started with building the frame. All right, Alright, so we are going to start with all of the frame pieces. So that first baggie, well, one of the baggies had the 2 back arms, the 2 front arms, and the top plate. The other baggie had the bottom plate and the middle plate. And this is all of the hardware that came in the one bag with the standoffs. And that had 2 longer standoffs, 6 shorter standoffs, 14, I'm gonna call them the small screws, 4 medium screws, and 4 long screws, and 4 press nuts. So to put this frame together, we're gonna set aside the top plate for now. And we're gonna start by putting our press nuts into these 4 holes in the middle plate. Now these pieces of carbon fiber are symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter. There's not a top or a bottom. All right, with all 4 of those loosely in place, all right, so we'll just have these on the bottom. That way this just sits upside down. So we've got our 4 press nuts in the middle plate. Now we're going to start with the front arms. You want the front arms with the bumps facing backwards. And then you're going to line up these 2 holes with the press nut and then the next hole. And this little cutout is going to be right around this centerpiece. Just like that. Matching it up where the 2 arms meet in the middle. And then with the back arms are gonna go in this fashion right next here. And again, this outer hole on the arm is gonna go in the press nut with this hole matching up next here, and this little cutout. This cutout piece is gonna surround this center hole. Just like so. And then this, which is actually the bottom plate, is going to sandwich them together. So you're gonna match, these are the arm holes. This center hole will go over here. And this center hole will kind of peek through right here. And that's how that frame goes together. The arms will use the medium screws, are gonna go into the outer holes, which go into the press nut. And then the longer screws will be the inner arm holes, and they will be threaded on with the standoffs. So let's go ahead and just start off with the medium screw. Try to thread that straight on. Get that loosely started. And do the same for the next one. And then the top arms. All right, so we've got our 4 medium screws loosely threaded into the press nuts. Tighten them down just a little bit so they don't fall out. Okay. Now we're gonna line up these holes. Just like that. And we're gonna take our longer screw, put them in that second arm, and then using the shorter of the standoffs, thread it onto that long screw. Do that for all the other arms. All right, now the arms are completely on, and we are left with nothing but our 14 small screws, 2 of which are going to be placed in the back for the remaining 2 small standoffs, and then 2 will be up front for the 2 remaining long standoffs. All right, and then the frame is put together. Now we will use 8 of these standoffs to attach the top frame to the 8 standoffs, which will give us 2 extra screws that I'm not entirely sure they are for. If you do know, let me know in the comments. But let's move on. All right, now that we have the frame all the way completed, let's go ahead and bring our TPU pieces over and see where they will go. All right, so the only things I can find on this specific drone kit are pictures on the websites that sell the drone itself, which are not very detailed. But right here we'll start with the GPS little box to hold it. This is going to go on the very back. We're going to slide that all the way down, just like that, so that'll hang off the back. This, with the Skystars logo on the side, this is our antenna holders. So our VTX will come out the back. Possibly our receiver antennas will come off the side through these little holes. But this will also be on these same standoffs, but it will be installed at the top, like that, with the top plate pretty much snug up against the top plate. And then we have these, which they have these pictured as antenna holders as well. For like Immortal Tees, they have it pictured. Coming right off the front standoffs, straight down like that, with the antenna going straight across the front. Also lifts it up just a tiny bit. And then lastly, these little TPU pieces these are gonna be our camera mounts. And they just slide on the front. And the camera will be screwed into these. So this kind of gives you an idea of the finished bare bones. There it is. So it's gonna be a pretty cool looking quad. It's gonna be a nice little mini long range setup. All right. Oh, and of course there are these TPU pieces, which are arm guards. Now, if you look at these, they look pretty similar, but there is a noticeable difference right here in the center. There is a small triangle, and then this one is slightly larger. The larger ones will go up front, and they just slide straight on just like that. And then the smaller triangle will be on the back arms with a nice snug fit just like that. All right. So that's the entire frame. Top will be just like that. Be cool little drone. All right, let's go ahead and move on to attaching the motors. All right. And now I'm actually gonna take off all of this just to give myself more room to work. I am gonna leave these on because I'm going to mount the motors directly through these. But if you notice, there are only 3 screw holes on the arms, but 4 on the motor. We're simply just not gonna use one of them. So it will be mounted just using 3 of the 4, but that should be plenty. This is not gonna be a freestyle drone, this is gonna be a long-range cruiser, so we shouldn't have any issues with that. So let's go ahead, empty out this. Now I'm just gonna start by pressing these in. And you're gonna wanna attach the motor with the wires going straight down the arm. Just like before, I'm gonna do a loose. I'm gonna screw down all 3 of them pretty loosely. All the way down. And then I'm gonna tighten it down just until the tip of this bolt pops through the top of the mounting plate on the motor. You just really want to be mindful to not touch the motor windings, which are that copper wire on the underside. All right, so now that we have all 4 motors attached with the arm guards, next we are going to install the ESC. So the ESC comes with this nice TPU spacer as well as adapter holes. It also comes with these gummies. All right, so we are going to find this baggie, which, yeah. So it's got 4 really long screws with some standoffs and 4 nuts. These are going to be our stack screws. It's important when you install your ESC as well as your flight controller to make sure it's pointing forward. And it's gonna fit right here. And if we look, this is I believe a 20 by 20, which this frame has 2 sets of square holes. Well, there's actually a 3rd set of square holes. We are going to use the larger square ones right here. So let's do it one at a time. You're going to take 1 Put it up. Hold the back with your finger. And we're gonna try to shove this screw through this TPU. It's a pretty tight squeeze. There we go. Got it pressed on. Now that's kind of in place. Do the next one. So yeah, do a couple threads in and then just shove it through. And that's what we're gonna look like. Now, you see, so we've got our sticker. I don't know if you can read that or not. Yeah. So this shows you our plug and then just our voltage input and output and stuff. So hold on to this. Remember, if you just go and put it on the box or something. And now we're gonna have the plug on the upper side facing forward. That way our battery leads will come out the back. So it's gonna come straight down. And press onto that TPU piece. So we've got plenty of space. Now we are going to route our wires. So I'm just gonna use our motor wires, and let's see. These pads are for the motors. We have 1, 2, 3 for this motor, and then 1, 2, 3 for this. Same thing on this side, 1, 2, 3 for front motor, and then 1, 2, 3 for the back. And I am just going to try to run these with the wires nice and flat along the arm. With a little bit of slack. And I am gonna actually trim these. So. All right, so now that we have our motor wires trimmed to the right length we need to get to the pads, and we've got the ends trimmed off as well, it is now time to break out the soldering iron and start soldering. All right, so first things we are going to do is pre-tin everything. So we are gonna pre-tin the ends of our motor wire. We're gonna pre-tin the pads themselves. And then we can start soldering. All right, so now we are going to also need this baggie, which has our XT60, which we need to solder to our ESC coming out the back. So let's go ahead and get this out as well. So inside this baggie, we have our XT60 end. We have a, what is it? 3M1447 capacitor, 25 volt. So we've got our capacitor. We have a extra linear antenna. We've got our connector cable for here. And then got some heat shrink, and our 2 cables, which are pre-tinned. But all right, so let's get to it. Let's start with the wires. So wires have been pre-tinned. Now let's pre-tin all of the ESC. All right, so I've got all my motor pads tinned. Now I'm gonna tin my positive and negative battery leads. So just to make it a little bit easier, I'm just gonna remove this standoff. Yeah, and the other one as well. All right, now that the whole board is tinned, let's just go ahead and start soldering up these motor wires. So like I said, I'm just gonna lay them flat and go one by one all the way down. So let's just Alright, at this point we have all of our motors soldered up to our ESC. We have our negative and positive pre-tinned. Now we have to make our XT30. So I am going to take our XT30 connector, and these barrels, I'm just gonna try to rotate it. I'm gonna rotate these so that they are both facing the same direction. And I'm basically gonna use this as a container to hold a big fat glob of solder. Alright, now that we have our XT30 made, we can solder it to the ESC. So once again, black is negative, red is positive. So we're just gonna set this straight on top. Right there. All right, now we have power. Now I'm gonna add the capacitor just right off the back here. I believe the VTX is gonna be installed right here. The wire going straight off. Probably about like that would work. Alright, so with the XT30, or with the capacitors, this white stripe is negative. So it's gonna go on the black. And then this one is positive. So let's just go ahead and clip it there. And there. And solder it on real quick. Just real quick, try not to. All right, now that all of the ESC soldering is done, let's go ahead and put these screws back in with the standoffs. Now I'm hoping the capacitor is fine right here. If I end up not having enough room for everything, I will move the capacitor to the end of the XT30. Which might be a better option anyway, so we'll see. Alright, now that we have our motors attached, soldered to the ESC, we have our XT30 and capacitor soldered to our ESC, we are going to move to our flight controller, which comes with a nifty little extra replica board as a guide that tells you what everything is and exactly what is going to be soldered where. So to make our lives a little bit easier, we're just going to set this aside and we are going to solder everything to our flight controller with it unattached from the quad. So included in the VTX baggie is, of course, the VTX, which comes with a nice plug, so we don't have to solder anything to this. We'll just plug it in, and then we will solder all of our wires to our flight controller. Also inside here is a protective shield to keep the backside of the VTX off of the frame because the carbon fiber is conductive. That's going to be mounted in this square section. First off, let's look at the VTX. Here we have a little button which will cycle through the output powers, I believe, which goes from 25 up to 400. So there probably will be an upgrade of this in the future. But then right here we have our connector for our VTX antenna. On the back side, right here, this tells us what our pinouts are. So this will be plugged in this direction with focus. So we have first red wire is our VBAT, then ground out, 5-volt out, and we have video, which is the yellow wire, and then data, which is the white wire. So we're not going to use our ground out and 5-volt out, so we're just going to remove those 2 wires from this plug. So we're going to start with that. Easiest way to do this is underneath these tabs. Pull it out. Pull it out. And push those tabs back in. There you go. Just like that. Alright, so now that we have removed the middle 2 wires, which are ground out and 5-volt out, which would go to a video camera, now we are left with our VBAT, ground, video, and data. So on the flight controller, those are going to be soldered up. Down here we have VTX, which is the yellow video wire. Right here we have VBAT, which will be our red power wire. Then right below it, to the right, will be ground, which is the black wire. And then just right next to it is our OSD, which will be that white data wire. Nick from the future here. So when I just told you to solder your VTX data cable to the OSD pad, I was mistaken. So we're actually going to move this down to this open pad, which is actually T6. So if I show you right here, we're looking at right next to VTX, we're gonna move the white wire, which is our data wire, to T6. Right now I have it on this OSD pad, so I'm gonna unsolder it, move it down to T6. Alright, see you back in the video. So let's go ahead and get everything pre-tinned and solder this up. It's not the prettiest, but that should do it for the VTX. Next, let's do the camera. So we're gonna do the camera next. Also came with a plug, some mounting hardware. So this camera, just 3 red, black, yellow, which is our 5 to 40 volts ground video. Alright, so now for the camera, I'm just gonna snip this off and just use the ends. And we are gonna solder on. We're using cam, this 5 volt, and this ground for our camera. So let's go ahead and do that. And right here. Alright, so our camera and VTX are wired up. Up next, last we have our GPS to wire up. Alright, now for the GPS, which is a BN180. Came with some cables. Red is our 5 volt, green is TX, white is RX, and black is ground. So, looking at this side is pretty much used up. So we're gonna be over here, and we are going to use 5 volts, ground, T4, and R4. Those 4 pads are going to be for our GPS unit. So let's go ahead, get these last 4 all tinned up, ready to solder. Alright, now that we've got our pads tinned, let's go ahead and get our length of wire. So this is going to plug into the GPS, which sits on the back end over here. So just roughly like that, plus some slack. Let's go ahead and just cut it. And this is what we'll use. Alright, so looking at our 4 pins, just a reminder. So we've got 5 volt. Let me turn this around. So we are looking at right here. 5 volts, ground, T4, and R4. So on this plug, we've got ground, a TX, an RX, and our power. So you we've got to remember that TX will go to RX and RX will go to TX. So with our pinout, we will have our red wire, our black wire, our green wire, and then our white wire. So let's go ahead and get that soldered up. Now that our flight controller has our GPS VTX video camera all soldered up to the board, the last thing we need to solder up is our receiver. And I am using a TBS Crossfire, the Nano receiver, whereas what we're looking at here, the square pad is ground. Next up is 5 volts. Then we have TX and the top corner is RX. So this ground pad, we're gonna go to ground right here. Then we're gonna go down 5 volts. And then this TX pad is gonna go to R1. And then this RX pad is gonna go to T1. So we're gonna use ground, 5 volts, skip this one, then R1 and T1. All right, so let's go ahead and get this tinned and soldered up. Alright, now that everything is soldered on, let's see if we can finish the build. So now we are gonna have our arrow facing forward. Let's go ahead and set this down, see what our clearance is like. Okay, not great. I need some sort of spacer. Let's see. All right, so I've got these little orange squishies. And they're too tall as is, so I'm gonna cut them in half, and those are gonna be my spacers. So just with my snips, 2 pieces, and I'm actually gonna use the bigger side of the 2. So I'm gonna just drop that straight down. Actually, before I bolt that down, you're gonna take this pin out, or this cable, and we're gonna plug it in. Now we can add our bolts, or our nuts. All right, so the stack is mounted in place. Now let's bring out the TPU, starting with the GPS. All right, so far I just unplugged the GPS and stuffed it into this TPU mount. So the plug is coming out of this little hole. So we're just gonna slide this right on. It's just gonna go all the way down to the base, just like that. Now, before we get too much further, let's go ahead and mount the VTX. So with the VTX, it actually came with these nylon screws. But they're pretty long, so I'm just going to use the extra 4 motor screws that we didn't use from only using 3 screws per motor. So I'm gonna use those extra screws to mount it right in this back section. So I'm gonna start with that screw. And then it also came with this plastic protector piece that has to be used to separate the VTX from touching the carbon fiber. So with that in place, go inside the standoff. We're gonna go underneath all of the power wires, with the plug facing out the back. Now, with the VTX attached, we pulled the GPS back off. We're gonna attach our VTX antenna. And this is gonna go through this TPU piece. So straight through down here. Slide it all the way on. And then we're looking for right there. Okay. Now with that clipped on, let's go ahead and plug our GPS back in. So we're going to lift the antenna up so this can go underneath it. Slide that all the way down. Then our XT30 is going to go through this little hole. And then lastly, our receiver, I'm going to slide up into this open slot right here in the TPU. I'm going to try to thread the antennas into these little antenna holes so I can then use the antenna tube. So let's see if we can do it. Alright, so now that we have the back completely done, we've got all the antennas in place, XT30 coming out the back. We're going to mount our camera. So just make sure the FPV camera wording is correct orientation, where your picture is not flipped upside down. That's how the camera gets mounted. Now you can adjust it. It's got plenty of angle. Now we're just about done. All we have to do is attach the top plate, which I'm just gonna leave the receiver just kind of floating in here, sandwiched in with the top plate. Now we are finally back with our small screws that we started the frame with. start threading those into the standoffs. And there we go. Oh, and one last piece in the box. And there we have it. That is the complete Skystars G4 long-range drone. Finish it up, we are going to use some gaff tape to tape the motor wires down to the arms. Now it is officially complete. Alright, now we're just going to open up Betaflight, and I'm using Betaflight 10.8.0. So now we're just going to plug in the Skystars G4, and we immediately get a warning that the accelerometer is enabled but not calibrated. No big deal. Go ahead, close. We'll just calibrate the accelerometer. Just make sure the drone is on a nice flat surface. It's done. Let's pick it up. Check our orientation. Looks like our pitch, roll, and yaw are all correct. Looks great. That is... oh, now we are on firmware 4.2.0, which is pretty old. So I'm just gonna immediately let's update the firmware. Now, easiest way, yeah, go ahead and click on auto detect, and this will find the flight controller that is plugged in. Here, Skystars F405 popped up, and that is the correct one. So I'm just gonna do release candidate as well, just to get the latest and greatest. Make sure you have full chip erase, and load the firmware. Here's what's changed. So we're gonna go to version 4.3.1. Here's some warnings. These are always good to read, just in case. And all looks pretty good. So let's just go ahead and flash. This may take a little while, but alright, looks like our flash was successful. Alright, now let's go ahead and connect. and then you get this notice, always hit apply changes. And go ahead and check the gyro, everything looks good again. So now we are all done in the setup. Let's move to ports. So UART 1 is our receiver, UART 3 is ESC, UART 4 is our GPS, and UART 6 is our VTX. Go ahead and save and reboot. Now on to the next page is configuration. Systems configuration looks pretty good, no changes there. For the arming, I'm going to raise this all the way up to excuse me, 180 degrees. That way I can arm in any position. Now these features, definitely want telemetry, and I believe that is it for that for now. Right here is GPS. We want to enable that. We're going to select U blocks, and then we're just going to turn all of these on, and then select this to auto detect, and that should do it for our GPS unit. D-Shop beacon, yes, I do want to have a beeper, just for a switch. I don't need it for Failsafe. And that looks good. Save and reboot, and that was the configuration tab. Next down the list, battery, power and battery. I don't believe I'm going to make any changes, so let's go to Failsafe. So here, I'm actually not going to have a failsafe switch, so that doesn't really matter. But this does. Typically I would set this to drop. 15 was pretty high. I'm going to set this back down to 5, which is a half a second. A little bit long. But now make sure we enable GPS rescue. That way we can get full use out of our GPS unit. I am just going to keep all of these default settings. The only one is minimum satellites. I may change that down. We'll see how well this GPS unit performs. And I will select allow arming without fix, and sanity checks to failsafe only. Go ahead and save and reboot. And then next we are looking at our PIDs tab. I don't think I'm going to change anything here. I'm just going to leave the defaults for now. In our receiver tab, we want our serial via UART. And then we are going to change SBus to Crossfire. Save and reboot. We're going to go back to our receiver tab, and now we're going to make sure our controller works. Make sure the quad has a battery plugged in, and looks like I have throttle. My roll is correct, pitch is correct, and yaw is correct. Now all of my switches, those seem to be correct as well. Looks like I have all of my inputs, which is awesome. Good stuff. I'm just going to save anyway, just to be safe. Now we're on to our modes, where I'm just going to do ARM, and I'm using the auto select, so I'm just flipping the switch and it'll auto detect which switch I choose. So next let's do beeper, and set that. It's my momentary switch. Let's see. Flip over crash. Set that for my aux 2. Do I like to have? Let's go ahead, add angle. Also on my aux 2 switch. That's my second position. And then that leaves me one extra switch, which on my other drones I would do a throttle limit. But this one, let's do something with our GPS. Or if I still have signal but my video's out, I can hit my GPS right here. GPS rescue will be aux 4. Perfect. Alright, let's hit save and continue on down the list. Adjustments, nothing in there, no servos. GPS. This tab, this is what you want to see as long as your GPS is hooked up correct. Right now we are inside, so it's not going to actually connect to any satellites, but it looks like it is trying for a few, which is awesome. That's a good sign. Oh, looks like very small, weak signals inside from 3 satellites. That's actually, I'm a little bit impressed, so hopefully this GPS unit does well. Alright, so on to the motors tab. So first things first, I like to do motors out. So I'll flip that. And we'll just stick with quad X. Save and reboot. Go back to the motors tab. Test our motor direction. So make sure you have props off, and you still need a battery plugged in to do this. So let's spin the motors, lightly touch the motors to see which direction they're spinning. Which one is this? One of my front motors. 4, 2. Yep. Alright, so 2 needed to be reversed. Alright, in the back motors, this one's good. Not this one. It's that one. 3. Yep. Number 3 stopped and reversed, so perfect. Alright, so all of our motor orientation have been set. Now, D-Shot 600 looks good. I'm not going to use D-Shot yet. I probably will update the ESC firmware in the future, just not today. And now I'm going to test my motors, just speed them up just a tiny bit. Feel them out once again, make sure they're all going in the correct orientation, which they are. Alright, let's go ahead and spin this down. That's slightly scary even without props on. Alright, moving on to the OSD tab.
Now this one is completely up to you, as this is just whatever your whatever information you want in your goggles. So I'm just gonna speed this up as I go through and set this up. But I like to have my VTX info, I like my fly time, RSSI, LQ, battery info. But now that I have a GPS unit, I'm going to add satellites and my home location and distance from home, as well as kilometers. My speed, that'll be fun. And last tab is the video transmitter. So we want to see device ready is yes. That means it is wired up correctly. If you've done this before, you might have something already saved on a file. But let's go ahead and just hit save. Now we're just going to disconnect from Betaflight just real quick. Open up your web browser and search for TBS Smart Audio VTX table. Click on the GitHub link, should be that very first one. And on this actually tells you how to do this download. But all you're going to do is just scroll down, and we are using TBS Smart Audio. We are going to look for 2.0 USA. Because we're located in the US, so. And 2.0 is typically most used. So we're just going to click this, or right click it, save as, and then you can save this wherever you want. I'm going to save this into my drone configuration folder, where it's just easy to find, and just save. Now with that saved into your files, we're going to go back to Betaflight, connect the Skystars G4, go back to the video transmitter tab. Now we are going to load from file, select that VTX table file, hit open, and there it is. There's our VTX table. Now let's change the number of power levels. There are 4 on this VTX. There it is, 25, 100, 200, and 400. So let's go ahead, change this down here. If this is incorrectly inputted and you try to choose the channel or the power level, it'll just default back down to its lowest setting. So remember to double check and to set this accordingly. Now with that set, let's save it. And very last thing we need to do is set our broadcast channel. So I'm gonna select race band channel 8. I'm gonna use the highest output power at 400. And I'm going to select my low power disarm, select that for on until first arm. And there we have it. That is the last thing we need to set up in Betaflight.
And if you've made it all the way to the end of this video, I applaud you and I appreciate you more than you could ever know. But we finally have a fully built and programmed 4-inch long-range drone with GPS, the Skystars G4, is ready for its maiden voyage. But this video has gone on long enough, so that is going to be for a separate video on its own. So make sure you subscribe and look out for that video. And if you found this video useful and informative at all, please hit that like button. And as always, I love you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.